And I'd like to welcome them all here to our presentation today. This is a very exciting panel. It's something that Courtney has been envisioning for a long time, so we're very excited that Courtney Miller and the Kreppen have been able to pull this together. The Kreppen, by background, is the commercial real estate executive professional network. It's made up of people who have committed their lives and their careers to commercial real estate from all angles, from envisioning and development and investments to architects and service providers that can be counted upon to be parts of these projects in a very high integrity fashion. So it's a by invitation only membership group headquartered out of San Francisco. And we're excited to put on events like this a few times a year that are informative, educational, and provide a format for people to get to know one another as well. So it's a chance to expand your network for being able to help with these projects in the future. And today we've got some very esteemed people on our panel, people that are working on very exciting projects that are hopefully give you kind of a mosaic of what's going on in the field of retail shopping centers. What's happening with strip malls? How has retail changed and how are successful people responding to that? What are some of the solutions that companies are utilizing to move forward in an environment that's been characterized by uncertainty and doubt and stagnation and big change? So it's exciting to see these projects now that are coming forward that are successfully inclined, and we can learn from them. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Adam Williams, who will be our first speaker, and a gentleman who is a developer and has mastermind solutions in the industry, and he'll tell us a little bit about what's going on, what's the background, the backdrop that we're working within from a development or investment standpoint, and a little bit about a project that he has recently concluded as well. Very quickly, by the way. So here's a gentleman with a background, almost 20 years in commercial real estate, MBA and a JD, and several years experience with financing as well as developing. Adam, would you like to take it away, please?
Sure. Thanks for that introduction, Paul. And it's a pleasure to speak today to the esteemed group here today. So I appreciate the opportunity. Like Paul said, I thought it'd be helpful to give a little bit of a contextual background to the state of the industry and understand a little bit about how we got here. I think it's a confluence of a number of factors. So if you go to the next slide, I kind of teed up some statistics on the retail industry relative to bricks and mortar retail. So if you look at this chart, what you can see is over time since 1970, really through the great financial crisis in 2009, US shopping center development outpaced population growth. And so what you saw is square footage per capita go from about 8 per person in 1970 up to about 23, which, by the way, we'll see on the next slide in a second, that's the largest in the world, the highest ratio in the world. And not surprisingly, because of the confluence of a number of other factors, this sort of flatlined from 2009 to present. And you can see it ticking down a little bit, although the rounding sort of keeps it up at 23. So, you know, what that led to, and if you go to the next slide, we'll see the United States relative to other major developed countries and the ratio of shopping center square footage to population, as well as sales productivity. So when you combine the two and look at aggregate retail sales and you divide that by retail square footage per capita, it gives you the productivity. And so what you'll see is the US has not only the largest or the highest ratio of retail shopping center square foot per capita, but also the lowest sales productivity. So anyway, long way of saying that the retail imbalances started decades ago, and it was a result of retail overdevelopment relative to population growth. And so fast forward, if we go to the next slide, you'll see e-commerce, which everyone, it's kind of the buzzword today. That was a major negative impact to bricks and mortar. And what you can see is the growth rate, you know, probably started out around, you know, other than the spike in the 2000s, around 20 to 30%, came down to about 15% per year. So you can see e-commerce as a percentage of total sales on the right side crept up from maybe a couple percentage points up to close to 14% today. It spiked pretty rapidly, not surprisingly, during the pandemic as people were at home and ordering from home. So what you can see is the pandemic accelerated these trends, but this was also major catalyst of the supply-demand imbalance in the industry. So if you go to the next slide, we also, it looks like this slide may be off. I wonder if it closed the PowerPoint, Stephen, if there's another window open.
I was going to suggest Stephen move to the next page, but you're right.
I wonder if you click on your Adobe, the PDF. There we go.
There it is.
Okay, so next slide. So in addition to the shift due to e-commerce, you also have consumer preferences changing, especially the younger generation spending more on experiences versus traditional products. So all of this is combining to create an imbalance in the industry, which has led to sort of a binary result. You've got the top productivity centers that are doing relatively well, although some of them need to be reinvented a little bit, and then those that were lower productivity that need to be holistically reinvented. So that, I think, is a segue into a project that I worked on. We go to the next slide. Recently, Cary Town Center, which was a roughly 1 million square foot regional mall in Raleigh, North Carolina, on 87 acres. It had been outpositioned by more dominant retail. So going back to that binary outcome, you've got the haves and the have-nots, so to speak. This one, declined over the years with increased supply, the issues we talked about earlier. So it lost tenants, it lost sales productivity, but yet was in a very fundamentally strong market. And so that's what attracted me to it, because you've got fundamentals, and I've kind of outlined some of the details here. You've got population base of 500,000 to 750,000, depending on if you include daytime population, high household incomes. It's an infill location in the Research Triangle, which is an educational hub with Duke, UNC, Chapel Hill, NC State, right on the I-40, 440 Beltway, near the airport, downtown, Research Triangle Park. So it had all these ingredients to be redeveloped into a higher and better use. So the thought process here was to initiate a plan to transform it. So quickly, what does that mean? You look at these malls and they're generally located on regional transportation infrastructure, where some of them are more infill than others, but generally a product of suburban sprawl with the movement away from downtowns. But some of them are more infill. What are the opportunities and challenges that are associated with redeveloping a mall? Well, I kind of listed the opportunities. A lot of them are located in very vibrant, high growth markets and submarkets in particular that lend themselves to office, residential, hotel, right-sized retail, not 1 million square feet. But in this case, we programmed 360 in the phase 2, of which about 200,000 was remaining. So that's one piece. But then secondly, what attracted us to this opportunity was a pro-growth government that was supportive of change, property-specific features. If you see here, you've got 5 anchors, JCPenney, Belk, Dillard's, former Macy's and former Sears. 2 of them were gone. JCPenney was about to leave, so leaving just 2 to deal with, and with longer term leases and approval rights. So that sort of mitigated some of the issues you have with diffuse ownership, long-term leases, approval rights, and that sort of thing. The last piece was, from an inline tenancy perspective, 79% of the tenants were expiring within 3 years. So we had mitigating factors to some of the longer term issues associated with redeveloping a mall that we felt we could for lack of a better way of saying it, unwind the mall, unencumber the mall, and unlock the development potential. So if you go to the next slide, I just kind of highlighted some of the complexity here. Each property is specific, and the leases, in my opinion, and the anchor approval rights are the most challenging aspect of retail shopping center redevelopment. For example, we had Belk that had a lease for another maybe 40 years. It's on the left side of this image. Dave & Buster's that was probably another 25 years or so. So those would need to remain. And then you had a scattering of tenants in the shopping center that would have to be either bought out of their leases or relocated. But for the most part, this mall, as you can see with the lighter colored boxes, was pretty clean from that perspective, so we could get to an unwind pretty quickly. So if you go to the next slide, and I'll quickly go through these. I want to be respectful of time, and also it just give you a high level thought about how we thought about things. First off, when we looked at it as almost a blank slate. What is it adjacent to? How does it interact with the surrounding commercial and residential? If you go to the next slide. Specifically, how could we organize a site to lend itself to mixed use? And our goal was, creating an interactive, walkable, engaging environment, which is what consumers want today, and really is kind of a reversion to, the way cities originated in the past. So this is a little bit of that evolution. If you continue to the next slide, how the streets and intersections would move. Next slide. Creating open space, trails, parks, recreation, integrating that into the plan. Next slide. And then ultimately arriving at a concept plan that we could one, socialize with the city to get it rezoned from 1 million square feet of retail on 87 acres to what this represents is about 4.5 million square feet of mixed use, 1.2 million square feet of office, 1,800 townhomes and apartment units, 360,000 square feet of retail, which is, sorry, the red. I should have been telling you the color schemes. Blue is office, yellow is residential, red is retail. And then the purple, we had about 450 or more keys of hotel rooms planned. So if you go to the next slide, that then led to a master plan, which we rebranded as Carolina Yards. And this was approved by the town of Cary, which is the first ring suburb of Raleigh or where the mall is located. We then worked to decommission and unwind the mall for unlocking the development potential. And I'll recap the business plan there, but the project details here, we went from basically 25% FAR to 1.2 FAR. So the density was increased about fourfold, a little bit more than fourfold. We preserved 10 acres of park space and then introduced all the improvements that I just walked through before. So if you go to the next slide, you can see some of the renderings, a civic green in the middle with the Belk that remains, as you can see in the background, but the new retail restaurants around the edge of the central green with rooftop patios, restaurants, et cetera. Next slide. You can see some of the multifamily and street level retail and from the other angle from the central green. Next slide. Interior corridors. We tried to create an urban core and then a peripheral area that was a little lower density, higher density, but less interactive. Next slide. Central Square. Next slide. Another perspective of that, the gathering areas, et cetera. Next slide. Office with retail underneath. Next slide. More street retail in the urban core, but very walkable and human scale, as you can see. Next slide. Multifamily that was more on the peripheral, as you can see, less interactive, more freestanding. Next slide. And so just to kind of recap, the execution here, our business plan, we saw an opportunity here with a well-located infill site with good market fundamentals, but just a mall that had seen better days and needed to be reinvented. Our plan was basically threefold: decommissioning the mall within 3 years based on the lease expiration, getting approval from the anchors that would remain, Dave & Buster's and Belk, phased demolition of the mall, and then ultimate sale or redevelopment of the mall. So the timeline there, and I'll wrap up with this, is we acquired the mall in 2019, January, for $31.5 million, completed the master plan within 3 months, acquired the only unowned piece, and this was key, the Dillard parcel, for $8.5 million, obtained city rezoning in December of that year, obtained the Belk and Dave & Buster's approval in June of 20, closed half of the mall in October of 2020, received an unsolicited offer for the entire site from Epic Games, which is the Fortnite creator, to create a global headquarters, and then ultimately closed the mall in January 21. So unfortunately, we didn't get to see the vertical phase 2, but what we did do is unlock the ability for someone to come in and redevelop the entire site within a relatively short period of time. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Paul and look forward to engaging on any questions later.
Thank you, Adam. That's awesome and right on time too. So highly commendable. As a facilitator, you always appreciate that.
Oh, thanks. I was trying. Hopefully I didn't go too fast.
No, well, we do have Q&A coming up as well. So thank you. Good. Well done. And that's exciting to see, a solution and moving forward that. And the quality of the team you put together to do that too is outstanding. Next, we're going to hear from Trish Beckman. Trish is a member of Field Paoli and has been with the organization for 20 years, has a lot of experience in mixed-use type real estate development. She lives in Marin County, California, and when she's not enjoying the beautiful hills hiking and running around there, she says that she's a terrible golfer. So with that, I'll let Trish introduce herself and talk a little bit about what are you seeing in terms of solutions to the challenge of unlocking potential in retail shopping centers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. And similar to Adam, I feel like I am in terrific, great company. Thank you for having me and having this opportunity to just share some thoughts about what's happening. And I've been in the retail industry now for over 20 years, and I've just seen the evolutions. Adam, I think your analysis on sort of the square foot per capita is absolutely spot on. I mean, compared to even just our neighbor up in Canada, I mean, we are exceptionally overbuilt. So go to the next couple slides, I think. Let's see where we're at. Next one. So I'm going to take this moment to talk a little bit about Northgate Town Square as an example of how another way we decommission, not necessarily decommission the mall in this particular case, because we are keeping a portion of the existing center, but really an interesting phase transformation of a still operating and generally successful indoor mall at this time. Next slide. So here's an aerial of what you see here today. Down to the lower right is Highway Interstate 101. Northbound would be going diagonal up the page, and you see in front of you sort of that large building with it looks blue. It's actually white, but here it looks blue. Is an existing Macy's. To the left, you can actually see in the Google image there that it's a branded Sears, which is now actually not there. Physically, the building is still there, but it's a different use. In the back, you've got a parking structure, and then to the right of that, the existing poles, and everything in between, what you see is actually the existing indoor mall. The properties that are to the lower right of the page are actually off the property of Northgate. But what you can see here is there's also some other out parcel opportunities. Next slide. So here's a plan view of the site, and you've got the dumbbell on either side. So the line in the middle is actually the mall concourse, and I'll mention this, talk about this a little bit later. And those dots that you see are the existing skylights. And then you've got the sea of parking again on that upper left is the existing parking structure. Next slide. I thought this diagram would be helpful for everyone to sort of understand, our two-phase demolition. And again, this project run by Merlin Geyer Partners they're very innovative in terms of, how do you take parts of it out over two phases as it relates to your various tenant obligations. So in the sort of salmon color, what you see is what's coming out for the 2021 phase, and in the blue is what will remain during that phase. Next slide. And then you can see the Macy's and the Kohl's and the associated Shops 1 would also come out in the phase 2, which right now is being targeted for 2040. Slide. And I thought it's helpful also to kind of look at that general context. And this is important in the sense that, you know, in Marin County, I don't know if many, perhaps all of you in the audience and my fellow speakers are familiar with the particularities. I mean, every community has their focus, right? So connectivity with, you know, transit, as far as, you know, neighbors, you can see to the left, there's a lot of single family rooftops. You know, many are Eichler homes that the Marin County really prides itself in the presence of Eichler neighborhoods. And then to the east, where you've got to the north, you've got in the purple zone, sort of an existing commercial zone, and the large red arrow is the freeway access to the site. So we're essentially taking the site of Northgate and reweaving it back into the community, right, as something that's integrated with the fabric rather than its current state, which is a shopping mall and a sea of parking. Next slide. So this is our ground level phase plan, site plan for phase 1, and with the residential on existing residential neighborhoods to the left and sort of the character of Northgate Drive, you can see that, you know, collating the residential, multifamily residential components together helps to create a district and an identity. Meanwhile, on the north side, again to the right of the screen here, would be the commercial district. And in the center where we have the cinemas, you see the park that is below that, we start to create sort of the shifting point, right, between what might feel like the residential neighborhood into a more commercial urban type district. Next slide. What you see on the left there, this is the upper level, typical upper level plan, is the stepping back of the massing of the building, really in respect to the massing of the single family homes that are adjacent, to not feel like this new project, you know, has eyes looking down over them. I think these are comments and concerns that have come in from the community that Merlone Geyer has really taken the time to listen, and of course they still have the financial model that is necessary to make this whole thing pencil, but the fact that they are reacting and responding to the community's requests and needs. Next slide. And now you're looking at the 2040 street level plan, and the idea is the ability now in a future phase to introduce a true town square. Now, here's the challenge when you're shifting an existing mall into different uses, and I think Adam and Fred can also speak to this. Parking still remains king, sort of this parking ratio issue with retailers and the typical requirement of having, let's say, a 4.5 per thousand. Some tenants are still asking for a 5 per thousand. And so in fact, the 2025 plan made it really challenging to be able to do really large moves because of the major anchor tenants that have to remain. But in the 2040 plan, it starts to unlock, and it allows the site to then continue, and it's almost like an infill of itself, right? To create this new town square, but urban in nature. We're able to do more of the park next to the cinema, sort of in our first phase. But now we can really complete this vision as having Northgate be the new core for Northern San Rafael. Next slide. And then this is the typical upper level plan. And you can see in the residential parcels 5 and 6, those are additional units that are being added. Next slide. So when you start to be able to uncouple some of these and the idea of, bringing a new urban plaza to essentially somewhat of a suburban neighborhood, right? But when we say urban, we're not talking about congestion, right? We're talking about the convenience of having a lifestyle that's on foot, not having to get into your car. When you walk from building to building, it's a nice and safe and comfortable experience that allows you to have leisure, whether you live sort of, in the Northgate Town Center area, or if you're coming from off-site and you're taking advantage of the amenities of the parks, the pavilions, the dog park, the children's play area, all of that, from near and far, the goal is to serve the community. Next slide. Some shots of the entrance. Actually, if you'll back up one slide, I actually forgot to mention. This particular structure actually is, we're keeping the existing mall concourse, right? So this is, I think, an architectural way to pay homage and take a nod to what was there. This Northgate Mall has been in Marin County for a very long time in all of its different versions. At one point, it actually was open air, and then it became covered. And this is sort of its third life. So trying to, we've used the existing structure. That's actually sort of the existing roof deck and those skylights I mentioned at the start of my segment here. They remain, but now we're recladding it and sort of bringing it into the new life for Northgate Town Center. So the Century Theater there that you see there is existing, and this is sort of I call it the surgical addition of new facades, right? So you're actually looking at the face of an existing building that, again, we're going to build into a new facade, and then we've got some retail shops in front. Next slide. This is the entrance to the cinema. Next slide. Just a sample of the retail buildings that we have, the idea of creating sort of dappled light and creating that comfortable human experience as you're walking through. Next slide. This is the community park. That's between the, we're doing mosaics on the Century Theater to the right, and then the residential on the left. Next. On the upper left is a photo of the existing garage, and this is sort of part of the picture is, to renovate the things that you have, the good bones that you have. There's no reason to, even from a sustainability standpoint, take down parking structure and rebuild it. So in this case, we're rebuilding a corner of the existing structure and adding some simple features as well as solar to the parking structure. And then you've got the new residential above retail, and then the plaza sort of extends to the left. The next slide. Another building of our residential over retail. Next slide. More of the street. This is if you're going to the right, you're walking towards the town square. And so the retail here is really facing out towards the main street. Next slide. And so, in Northgate, we've kind of hit upon these 6 highlights, right? The idea of creating that new community hub, right? The new uptown to the current historical downtown of San Rafael. Creating community engagement is hugely important, especially here in Marin and in San Rafael, and then in Terra Linda proper, which is the subset of the neighborhood. Promoting connections to multimodal paths, that's pedestrians, bikes, and then into the smart train stations that will be coming in, the reuse of existing mall structure with this pavilion and the cinema, and adding new facades, and then the phased retail conversion. That's it. Bye. So thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to hearing more questions and discussions.
Excellent. Thank you, Trish. It's a very exciting project, and similar to Adams, we're talking about, projects that are reaching $1 billion in terms of development costs and values and budgets here. So, I know you've worked with small and large projects, as has Adam, who's done multiple projects as well. And we learned from each one of those. And that last slide you had up there showed some of the secrets to success that we're looking for in these retail shopping centers that Adam and you have both highlighted so far. The community engagement and kind of a hub that these projects are becoming, and promoting connections with transportation, very critical. Reusing the retail, redesigning the facades in new modern ways, and really integrating housing as a component of these in very key ways as well. And a lot of communities are putting a lot of pressure on themselves to do just that. And so the retail shopping mall becomes part of a community hub and a community solution for their social needs. And on that, we're going to shift over to Fred Pollock and talk a little bit about Fred's experience and some of the things that he's doing to help companies and communities to do just that. Fred's somebody who has 30 years of experience in architecture with this firm, and his firm is headquartered in San Francisco, Denver, and Minneapolis, working on projects all over the country. So thank you for joining us, Fred, and I'll let you take it away from here, please.
Great. Thanks, Paul. I'll take my mask off and say hello to everybody. Thanks for having me today.
So we're unveiling secrets and also unveiling faces today. I love it.
That's right. But I just want to say hi.
Say, who's
and
that?
thank you. You don't recognize me without the mask. Now I'll put it back on. All right. Well, thanks again for having me. And I really appreciate both Adam's and Trish's presentation. And I think it sets up an interesting contrast to what I'm talking about. And I appreciate Adam's kind of ability to navigate so quickly through a very complicated and large scale project. And Trish, your work in Northgate, that much more, I would say, incremental approach and sensitive kind of surgical approach to rejuvenating and re-envisioning a retail mall. What I'm talking about today is a bit different, and I'm going to focus a little bit on some of the regulatory frameworks that made this particular redevelopment possible. And I'll be talking about Valco Mall, which is located in Cupertino, California, down in the South Bay, close to San Jose. And what you see here in just this title sheet, and I love this shot, is that this is actually the Bohannons looking out at Hillsdale Mall when they envisioned Hillsdale Mall. And in the same sense that at that time, it was sort of a visionary approach to what they were considering. Now we are looking at new visions and new reuse. And we're looking at one of the main causes of some of these retail failures. A lot of the strip centers and retail, big retail malls really became so formulaic. They didn't fit into the neighborhoods. And what Adam and Trish discussed was about creating those things and the framework that are specific to the neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So Valco Mall, if you see, the site is outlined on the bottom of the screen with the red line. It's a 50-acre mall built in the 70s. By the 80s, it was struggling due to regional competition. Sand Hill Property was able to consolidate ownership of this mall, the entire property. And it's at a kind of pretty strategic location, really. It's Interstate 280 just above it. And it's separated right across the freeway to the Sir Norman Foster's Roomba, the Apple campus, just located to the north. And the Apple campus is actually 75 acres. It's a little distorted in this picture. So Valco is divided, the mall is actually divided by a main, I believe it's a Caltrans road as well, Wolf Road, that separates two pieces of the mall, the west and the east side. Next slide, please. So that original vision, and I should have looked at those stats briefly. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so sorry, now I'm going to look at some things. There we go. So this eventual mall is leading to a development on these 50 acres of about 2,400 units and 1.8 million square feet of office, 400 square feet of commercial space. And this was done through a mechanism called SB 35 or Senate Bill 35, which is state streamlining. And for those of you on the call that may be familiar with this Senate bill, it allows a streamlining for residential projects in California, which are 2/3 residential. So keep those in mind as we look at this. This is the timeline for the overall development. In 2014, the city of Cupertino adopted some general plan policies for the redevelopment of Valco Mall. And that included mixed use goals for the site, residential, office, and commercial space. In 2015, after Sand Hill had consolidated all the ownership of the 50 acres, they proposed a plan that included 800 units of residential, 2 million square feet of office, and 625,000 square feet of commercial, which was compliant with that general plan designation. As they embarked on a specific plan for the site, which is required to enact that zoning and move the project forward, the city killed the specific plan. And there was a ballot initiative which also killed that specific plan, didn't allow the project to go forward. In the meantime, SB 35, the state legislation, was adopted at the state level. And this allowed a potential route for entitlement to the Sand Hill team. And this included providing housing, retail, and office on the site. And what SB 35 allows is no discretionary review on the part of the local jurisdiction. If it meets either the zoning or the general plan designation, the project has to go through with just non-discretionary review. So no design review, no direct planning approval. They eventually have to just say, yes, this meets the zoning, and it gets approved. Sand Hill Development went with this route, and then the lawsuits started. It was actually last year, and many of you may be familiar with this, I believe it went to the California Supreme Court, where they found that SB 35 stood and the entitlement was in place and it could proceed under SB 35 regulations. Now, what this helps us with in our communities as we think about our communities is it's really allowing a lot of generation of housing, which is what we sorely need in California. And that total program of 2,400 units, 400,000 square feet of retail, 1.8 million square feet of office, and included in this was a roofscape, a park on the roof, all right? Half of the units in addition are affordable, so 1,200 units of affordable housing, which provides added benefits to the development. Next slide, please. So here's the overall look with the bay beyond and the Apple campus in the big circle. In the foreground in the left, you see a little bit of a green, a kind of landscape, and that is Valco Mall. And what that greenscape is, it's essentially showing in this drawing about 8 to 10 story buildings with a green roof that covers the whole thing and then drops down to the ground. Or in, I believe, what did Courtney call it? The green comb over, I think is what he called it. But nonetheless, what this allowed was it created a public park on top of this mixed use neighborhood. And because of that, the developer did not have to pay park fees as part of this. It was a dedication versus the park fees, so it saved a lot of cost in the actual fees required. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what the SB 35, and just touching on this briefly. So again, the general plan mixed use designation, it met that requirement. It provided 2/3 of the total development square footage in residential. It allowed, because of the affordable housing, it allowed a density bonus. So the residential could be developed rather than 50 dwelling units an acre, 65 dwelling units an acre. So it upped the potential unit count by about 500 units in the residential side to get it to 2,400 units. It's ministerial approval, so it's not subject to CEQA, and there's no traffic study required for the development. There's also no parking requirement for the residential portion of the project because of its proximity to transit. It's within a half mile of major transit lines. You also are allowed waivers because of the affordable housing. So that allowed different unit types for the affordable. You could go with 1 bedrooms and studios versus 2s, 3s, bigger units. You could do them smaller sizes. And the general plan required a minimum of 600,000 square feet of retail. And then one of the waivers was to provide only 400,000 square feet of retail. No park fees we touched on. There's also no height limit on the site as a result of this quirk that the specific plan was never adopted by the city. So technically there was no height limit. Next slide, please. So what emerged is a little bit different. It's still the same concept, but what you see here is with the additional program from 800 units to 1,200 units, and including the 1.8 million square feet of office and the 400 square feet of retail commercial, you see small housing towers up on the roof. That added the residential program, and then you can see the park again, how that green space comes down and forms the rooftop over the retail, and then the streets themselves are kind of cut out of that roof, and the plazas are cut out. Next slide, please. This illustrates it more from the ground level, and this shows the way that green roof comes and touches down. So this is toward the single family side of the surroundings. So from here, you can just kind of walk up on the roof with these paths that kind of cut diagonally up on the roof, and then you're connected by bridges to open space. Next slide, please. And here you can begin to see the kind of retail buildings reveal themselves under the roof. In the distance up in the trees, you see the towers poking through the top. So we're up at about 22 stories above grade, and that green roof coming down to grade. So this is a very unusual approach architecturally, a very unusual approach in a jurisdictional approval, very particular to the location and the needs here. Next slide, please. And here's kind of Wolf Road running through, and you can see a section in the foreground. There's the green roof, the buildings below the green roof. And this has demolition is in the works. Next slide here, please. And I look forward to folks' comments and questions. My contacts there is a photo of the demolition, which is ongoing at Valco Mall. Thank you.
Wow. Excellent. Thank you, Fred, for sharing that very exciting and innovative project, which gives all of us more ideas about what's possible, what can be done. You know, the legend has it that in Japan, the word for danger is the same word as opportunity in their language. And I think a lot of people are feeling the danger investing in retail malls. And what's nice is that the three of you have been able to really present some great opportunities that exist for us as well. So some good solutions to the challenges that we're facing today. At this point in time, and again, thank you to our panelists for some wonderful presentations and sharing some life's work and passion here. I'll note that I think all three of you are very outdoorsy people that like to get out and hike and bike and be part of nature. And I see that as an integral element for each of these presentations that you've done. All the projects here have that, not only community feel that we're bringing back into retail, but also the outdoors and green feel to it as well. So a lot of ESG in these new projects. At this point in time, we'll open it up to Q&A. And I'm sure some of our audience have been holding back on some of their questions and or comments. So now's a good time to start to engage a little bit with our audience there. So if you have questions or want to make some comments, feel free to throw it into the chat as well. One question is, will the Zoom session be available for view later? And the answer is yes. For people who are interested, let us know, and we will share with you a link. And that's why we're recording the session, so that we could share that with people in the future as well. Courtney Miller shares a chat. I don't know if everybody can see that, but it says, one of the amazing aspects of a trip to Sweden in the 70s, I noticed that because of public sector engagement, there was also libraries and childcare centers, not just commercial housing. Would this also help reduce risk if the public sector was more of a creative partner? Who would like to take that question on? Go ahead, Fred.
Courtney, again, I think this relates to the individual circumstance of each redevelopment. I think there are examples out there of the local municipalities building facilities in the redevelopment as part of the redevelopment of the retail centers. The Belmar project in Lakewood, Colorado, we were involved in many years ago. That includes city center functions as part of that, where the city of Lakewood was involved in providing offices and whatnot there. So I don't know if that, if it helps from a risk perspective, but that rich mix of uses certainly can help create more of a complete community.
And I was going to add to that as well. One of the discussions we were having on Cary Town Center was a civic community center that would have a sporting venue and also host events and that sort of thing that was for the city. And that would be city built, actually. And we were working with them potentially to come in and buy a section of the site to do that. But I think the overall theme here is, I think each of the panelists touched on this, is taking a step back, looking at the overall context of the location and how this integrates to the different existing uses and becomes integrated in the fabric of the community, and also serves to activate what is not as active today in its current format. And that could cut across a variety of different things, not only commercial uses, but civic uses as well.
Yeah, and I think that civic uses, the opportunity can present itself. It again, is I think project specific. I mean, long ago we worked on the Otay Ranch Town Center, really well before I think retail centers were looking to be more mixed use. And when we finished the project, actually the city of Chula Vista, which is just outside of San Diego, came in and decided that they wanted to build a library there. And so there's some tenant spaces that were not yet leased, and they came back in and did do the Chula Vista library there. The food hall pavilion that we built there, they had high school proms there, and the marching band goes down the street during different special events of the year. So I think, in today's context, when we retool and right-size the retail on these existing centers, the key is really we're building a neighborhood, right? And so I think that's very poignant, that these additional uses almost have to come into play. I mean, we're not building a new retail street. We're building, everything for live, work, play, and going to the library. I think that's a great point. And so it all ties together.
Good. The question came in from John Gracina. Is there any idea how many locations in the Bay Area are right for this type of redevelopment? And we say type of redevelopment, every project, of course, is unique, but what we're talking about here is making retail more vibrant, more relevant by engaging community, engaging the public more, opening it up to environment and some social and governance overtones in here as well, and transportation changes in the country. So what is your response to that question about locations in the Bay Area that are open to that type of development? I guess, Fred, one question within the project you're doing in the South Bay, is that unique, or is that something that there's an opportunity for other locations to mimic that?
Well, I would say it's unique in approach. And I should also mention that, it's Raphael Vanoli is the architect, who's sort of a, world-class architect. They are responsible for the architecture. We are consulting on the affordable housing component of that. Just wanted to say that so everybody understood that. We're not responsible for the architecture. But what I will say, and I'm sure that Adam and Trish also have this similar experiences, there are so many mall owners and retail holding companies that are looking now and reevaluating those assets to try to determine what their future are. And I think, to the question, there are so many from small retail centers. There's examples of smaller centers, not these large scale ones, but 3-5 acre retail strip centers that are in need of revisioning and are underperforming. And the people that are holding them are looking for ways to creatively either redevelopment or add more value to those centers. And we see it in the East Bay, we see it in the North Bay, we see it in the South Bay.
Yeah, I would agree. Just to put some numbers around that, for example, there are, I think, 1,100 malls, enclosed traditional malls in the country. And, depending on which expert you listen to, anywhere from 300 to 500 or more of them should evolve. And so I think that, to Fred's point, is one example. And then, a variety of others. You think about big box, the category killers that were, maybe anywhere 40-acre sites or 30-acre sites that had a strip of, XYZ big tenant, whether it was former Circuit Cities or Linens and things, to even today, Bed Bath and Beyond and others that are, each have different levels of productivity, and in general, most are looking at smaller prototype footprints. So those that were what was unique about retail is it was a bit of a puzzle put together by store prototypes. And as those prototypes went from larger format to small, those more special, I almost consider them special use development projects, need to get retooled. And the bay depths, for example, don't work for today. So you're either having to shallow them up or demo parts and rebuild. So there's a lot to happen in this country across product types in retail. And then on the flip side, you see shoots of growth. The F&B category surpassed grocery sales for the first time in history a few years ago. So food and beverage, notwithstanding pandemic temporary impacts, but food and beverage is really strong. Discount is very strong. So there's just, it just depends on what category you're talking about.
But it sounds like there's opportunities for all communities and all sizes.
Agree.
Absolutely. Well, and I think with the amount of brick and mortar retail square footages, right? It eventually, if some of the centers don't start moving, coming back to how many locations, I would say most of the retail centers around the Bay Area could potentially be a strong opportunity. I mean, there just is not the need for the amount of square footage, and so you can try to keep leasing it, but more and more people will be looking for the experiences, and sort of your day-to-day is going to become less relevant.
That was one of the comments that was submitted on the chat, was how important is the sense of experience to the redevelopment ideas of the malls.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. I think with the, we want to think of e-commerce not as the evil stepsister, but really as a partner, right? I think the availability of technology and e-commerce allows a new synergy for people to have a better use and better control of how they want to spend their valuable minutes of the day. I mean, let's remember, every single minute that passes has passed, right? So you've spent about 50 plus minutes with us, and you can't take that back. And I think that the quality of how people are now aware of more than ever, right? And how you're choosing to spend those minutes. I don't want to spend an hour and a half going to the grocery when I can spend 30 minutes ordering it and have it come to my door, because now there's 60 minutes I can spend with my daughter, right? And so those are the choices that e-commerce has allowed us to make, but then brick and mortar has to shift, right? Brick and mortar is about getting together with friends, spending time with my daughter at a really nice environment, walking outside. And so that's why I think it becomes more important.
Yeah, I think it's good to remember the positives, because retailers continue to open bricks and mortar stores. It's just part of an omni-channel fulfillment. And while bricks and mortar was the predominant channel, now that channel is more diversified with e-commerce, m-commerce, so forth. And then now with delivery and pickup at store, et cetera, there's just new evolutions that need to be handled. But I think you hit on it, Trish. It's just we have too much square footage. It's not the death of retail. It's just evolving to a more efficient format. And that causes some pain in a capital intensive industry where you've got fixed assets, leases, et cetera, that are hard. They're not easily adaptable to changing their footprints like that. So that's what we're dealing with. And then it's an opportunity to integrate further in the community and involve in a way where you can interact more with other uses, which I think is exciting.
No, it's very good points. We have a couple other questions in the chat. I'll try to sneak in here as well. Let's see, how are these redevelopment projects being received by planning departments? Bruce would like to know. Try to allocate maybe 1 or 2 minutes for each of these last 2 or 3 questions.
I'm
then
sorry,
we'll bring it to
Paul,
an end.
Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I saw it in the chat.
Yeah, how are these redevelopment projects being received by planning departments? We talked a little bit about, was it SB 35, Fred? And how it limits a little bit the discussion from planning departments, but in general, are planning departments encouraging? Adam, you bought a piece of property and got it all the way through master plan and entitlement and sold it in a 2-year period of time. That's incredibly fast for Bay Area terms. How did you find the planning department in Raleigh?
Yeah, it's I think so jurisdictional specific, and here I think they'd seen some failed attempts before. For example, at this particular site, there was an IKEA that was potentially coming in and allowing for some redevelopment of a portion of the mall. Another sports facility called Topgolf. I'm not sure if that's made it out to the Bay Area yet, but they were coming in, but those deals fell out. So that the city was really looking for a catalyst of change, and so highly supportive with oversight though. It needed to fit in with their long-term plans and so forth. So we worked collaboratively with the city to find a win-win solution, and so they were very supportive. And I think that was important going in. But I would suggest that most are supportive. It's just there are various interests to be addressed, and obviously different regulatory regimes that may be in place. I think Fred talked about some of them, CEQA, so forth. So what are those hurdles in any jurisdiction? But I would imagine that most are generally supportive. It's just the regulatory framework to navigate through that differs pretty widely. But I'd be curious to know what Trish and Fred think, because we've each had our own experiences.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, we've had very positive responses from planning as far as sort of the go, no go on the project. I think every jurisdiction feels that the improvement, the investment, and the redevelopment of something that could potentially be, on the decline, is positive for the city, right? And so I think more from a planning department standpoint, it's more about, being able to meet the unique needs and the perceived needs of the community, of their sort of constituents. And, they, of course, are careful about sort of what the architecture looks like, but also, the mix and the product type, whether it, is 4 or 5 different types of uses. Housing continues as, certainly here in the Bay Area, a hot topic about affordable housing and being able to provide for the people who work here and not have to drive 2 hours to find an affordable place to live. So I think all of that ties in, and finding the right balance between the different uses is the tricky thing, but that's why we're all here.
That's right. One of the questions that came up too, and there's a few questions in here, but I know we're running low on time. Just briefly, how accurately are we able to estimate the construction and redevelopment costs? Are we good at it, or are we finding a lot of surprises when it comes to demolishing or tearing things apart? Was it like my kitchen project? I go to fix a leak and one thing leads to another, and pretty soon I've got a whole new kitchen.
No, we know exactly what it'll cost, Paul.
I mean,
it's like you sneeze and the cost has gone up.
It just, again, if we look at the Bay Area or maybe the California condition where everything perhaps is a little unique here, just between escalation, material deliveries and disruption, it's very challenging to get accurate, a picture of cost.
Yeah, well, it's true. And then, go ahead, Adam.
I was going to say, I'd be interested to hear from Trish, but in my experience, I've always found that redevelopments are always much harder than ground up, greenfield, or even scraping and rebuilding, because you don't know
what's in there.
Do it. And we do as much diligence as we can to really understand it. But sometimes, when these are built in the 70s, you're not necessarily getting perfect information on plans and specs and as-builts, and so it's challenging to understand really what you're dealing with. So you have to build a margin of safety, and then the inflationary aspects of today kind of add to that. But anyway, I've found the redevelopment actually harder than pure ground up.
Yeah, I 100% echo Adam on the redevelopment component. I think sometimes the strategy is also to look at how can you isolate what you're rebuilding or, redeveloping as existing infrastructure. And then, some part of it then becomes new and ground up to help kind of mitigate your risk on what's existing that you have to contend with. But, yep.
Well, there's the voice of wisdom and experience right there. So I'll take this opportunity to thank all 3 of our panelists for sharing your experiences and your wisdoms and your secrets to success in retail shopping mall redevelopment in America. So thank you, everybody. Thanks to all of our participants for hanging in there with us today. And let us know if you'd like to have a copy to a link to the recording and the presentation. And we'll welcome everybody to participate and interact with the Commercial Real Estate Professional Network more in the future as well. You can find us on the website or talk to the person who invited you to our presentation today. Wishing you all the best. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.